Welcome to All Things ADAS. I have another session here today. My name's Jerry Miller. I'm your host. We've got James Rodas, in other words, we really call him Spike. And we've also got Rebecka Cooper with us from the Cooper firm out of Atlanta, Georgia. And Rebecka, why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of an idea who you are and what you represent?
Sure. Thanks, Jerry. My name is Rebecka Cooper, and our firm is the Cooper firm. The primary work that we do is product liability work against auto manufacturers primarily. So the work that we do really entails representing individuals who have been catastrophically injured or who have loved ones who have been killed as a result of a defective product. And it's been through working on those cases that we have kind of wound our way into learning about the world of ADAS and calibrations and vehicle maintenance.
Well, that's pretty wild as far as I'm concerned. You know, from our world, being in the automotive side of it, it's been a little, anytime we hear somebody say that they're a lawyer or attorney, we get a little nervous. So from my end of the world, it's always been find yourself a good lawyer. And I've always wondered how in the world you find a good lawyer. You find that out afterwards, I always thought, not before. It's kind of like, how do you find yourself a good technician? Well, if they fix the vehicle right and it seems to go down the street properly, I guess we found a good one.
That's exactly right.
So, Spike, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Again, James Rodas with OEM Calibration, and was a body and painter most of my life, and then 2014 kind of started digging into some calibrations and how important they are, and now proud to say that we are all throughout the Midwest and doing things correctly with OEM tooling only, which is something we're pretty proud of because the number of people doing that's about that much. We're glad to be in the top 1% or so.
Yeah. Well, Rebecka, it's a simple question for you, but I think there's a lot of folks out in my end of the world that probably wonder this. What's the difference between a lawyer and an attorney?
The real answer is there's no actual difference. It just depends on who likes to call themselves a lawyer and who likes to call themselves an attorney. And I don't really know how we got there, but here we are.
So you're both then. Okay. All right. So, it's interesting to me that you're interested in the ADAS. I'm kind of curious. How do you get educated on the ADAS systems in cars, or to even have an idea that there was that contributed to an accident or a failure where somebody did get hurt or lose their life? How did you get educated in that side of the world at all?
Sure. So it's a little bit of trial by fire. The way that it happens for us is we'll have someone come to us with an injury or a death, and we start with just investigating the crash, which is what happened and why did it happen. And from that initial incident, the crash, we work backwards, which is what vehicle were they driving, what components were on the vehicle, and how did those components perform in the crash. And that concept is called, in our world, crash worthiness. For example, if you got in a crash and your airbag did not deploy, that's a crash worthiness issue, meaning did the vehicle protect you the way it should in a crash? We know crashes are going to happen, just like you all know. They're going to happen. And then the question is the vehicle adequately designed in a way that will protect folks to the extent possible during that crash? So that's crash worthiness. ADAS is interesting because it's a little different. It's actually a crash prevention system or a mitigation system. So at that point, our investigation is not just how did the vehicle perform during the crash, but was the crash avoidable via technology that's available in the market today? Mm-hmm. And so in some of our cases, what we found was it wasn't a crash worthiness case. It wasn't about how did the vehicle perform in the crash. It was a crash avoidance case. Could the crash have been avoided by ADAS technology? Now, the next part of your question was how do you become educated about it? That is doing research a lot of the time, reading information that you all put out. So we, as the attorneys, we don't start out as the expert. I mean, we're not the expert. That's not our training in these technologies. But number one, we'll retain experts. We'll actually pay experts to teach us. They're called consulting experts. And then number two, we do research. We listen to podcasts like this. We read literature online. You actually reading the OEM literature is very helpful because it gives you an idea of, as Spike knows, almost gold standard for doing these repairs. So that's a little bit of how we got into it and a little bit about how we educate ourselves.
Interesting. And And I'm curious, how did you and Rebecca run into each other?
So she was on, I think it was Jason Stahl's podcast, Under the Radar. And Jason's somebody that we collaborate quite a bit. We just did an ADAS roundtable with Jason here, a couple months ago. I watched the podcast, and right away I'm like, okay, I want to see if I can have Rebecca on ours, because it was great. There was a lot of good information, and I think more shops need to hear about this, because we hear all the time, I'm not going to worry about that. That's customer pay. We're not going to do the calibrations because we want to keep that price down. And we're trying to tell these shops, you have to do the calibration. You don't have a choice. You are the expert. And even if which Rebecca knows, even if you have them sign probably a very poor liability waiver, you're really not waiving liability because you're the expert. You probably should have explained it to them differently, so they said, no, I do want this calibration done because this matters.
So, $1,000,000 question. Rebecca, how does the shop make sure that they don't have to have a visit from you?
That is the $1,000,000 question. So, and I was thinking through that before coming on this podcast. I think what it boils down to is this. You all are the experts in your field, right? And
We're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I'm speaking to you too. I'm not speaking about the field. I'm talking to you two on this podcast right now. You all are experts in your field. And so what your responsibility and your shop's responsibility really is to be and behave like the expert. Now that's two things. That's one, inform, and two, adequately repair. Now this is not if you do this, you will never be named in a lawsuit. That's not what this is. But what this is covering your bases, and it's twofold. One, it's in anticipation or to avoid litigation. But the other piece of it is just to feel good when you go home at the end of the day about the work that you're doing for your customers.
Yeah, be moral.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you all have more, arguably more lives in your hands as a result of your profession than actually most folks do. You're putting 15,000-pound vehicles and sending them out into the world. So the inform piece of it is really inform and document your expertise, meaning provide the customer and your records with everything they need to know about this is what should have been done during the repair, and you list that out. Now if that's OEM standard, then that's almost the cleanest, right? Because you just say we just follow the OEM standard for calibration and itemize that. There's nothing wrong with being thorough in your documentation, and frankly, if you do it once, you can use that same form if it's the same vehicle, and be careful with that, right? Don't use a one size fits all, because as you guys know, it's not a one size fits all. So number one, you inform and you document. That's informing your customer, that's informing you internally, informing your management. And then the second piece of that is actually do what the information prescribes. And at the end of the day, like I said, that doesn't mean something bad is, never going to happen to anyone that in a vehicle you serviced. But when it comes back to you, you're able to say, here's the gold standard and here's what we did to follow it.
So let's just say we're talking body shop or even a mechanical shop. Let's say that whether or not they're under an insurance or just it's out of customer pay pocket situation. But let's just say a car comes in and whether it's a mechanical shop, let's just say that their brakes are bad. They're dangerous. They didn't come in for that, but we notice that they've got brakes that are dangerous, and or they need a calibration, and they, as a customer, say, no, I don't want to have this done. What, aside from us just simply saying and noting on a repair order or documentation that here's what we found, customer, elects not to do the proper repair, as a shop, have I now done what I need to do to protect myself? Or is there something else that I need to do? I used to hear consultants would tell us back in the day that if a car comes in and the brakes are bad, don't let the car leave. Well, what do you do? I can't chain it to the wall.
Not your car.
No, it's not. Yeah. What do I do? So I guess that's the question. What, as a shop or a repair facility, what do we do in a case like that?
It's a timely question, Jerry, because we're actually litigating a case like that right now. It's against a defendant that is a huge company. They're everywhere. And their position has been this: you can bring your car in, and in this case is about tires. You can bring your car in, and we will not notify you about the tread on your tires, but we will do an oil change and we will rotate your tires, but we will not measure and we will not inform you about your tread. That wasn't always their policy, but it's their policy now. Someone went into that shop, they left with bald tires. Literally within 24 hours, they hydroplaned on a road and passed away. Now the shop's position is, we told them, we had him sign this thing on an iPad, 23-year-old kid, but we told him. And in our position is why'd you work on his car at all? Send him away. Don't work on his car. I mean, because the question then is, you're willing to take his money for the oil change, and you're willing to take his money for the tire rotation. You're willing to profit off of that, but you know that car is dangerous when you send that car back out on the road. You wouldn't put your kid in that car. The CEO of that company wouldn't drive that car, but you're willing to send him out. And so, and the question is, could they get out of that because they had him sign that? That depends on the venue. It depends on your judge. It depends on your jurisdiction. And it depends on, how that gets argued and how it's not a one size fits all. You don't know how that's going to come down necessarily in the courts. But what you know is that's not right. Mm-hmm. That's not right. So I think it's tough if someone comes on the lot and says, I want you to do X, Y, and Z, but not A, B, and C. But in my opinion, I mean, and this is just almost from more of a common sense standpoint, send that person away. You can't lock the car up. You can't keep it. But don't take some of their money to do some of the repairs and then give them back a dangerous vehicle.
That's interesting. The problem, my next question then based off of that would be, some of the things, you get a vehicle in and you're doing some of the repair that it came in for, and in that process, some things aren't always visible up front to know it. So now I'm into the vehicle and now I discover something that is dangerous, but I've already done part of the repair, and that's when I discovered this other issue. So now I'm already committed. I've already spent some of the money. And, now what do? I realize that no matter what you do, sometimes you can still be named in any kind of a lawsuit. I think that's really the question of that a lot of repair shops get involved with is, now what do? I'm kind of caught between a rock and a hard place.
And then I got to follow up to that one too. So on the waiver, I get it. Sometimes, it's a big, long thing. People don't even read it. They just sign, this just, is saying that, hey, we're not going to measure your tire depth. If you were to break it down, let's just call it Barney style, as I say to my kids, break it down Barney style so everybody can understand it. If it was a simple one line, I understand if I don't do A, B, and C ADAS calibration, I may possibly die. If it's spelled out to where anybody should be able to understand that, does that give you a little more, I can sleep at night in that instance?
Yeah, I mean, it really is a case-by-case basis situation. I mean, I think I've never seen that done just as far as that much information. A lot of the times what we see is it's like sign this thing on an iPad or sign this thing on a cell phone, and you're in the middle of the lot. You don't know really what you're signing, but you got to get your cars, so that's what you're going to sign. I think that's two separate questions. Really, Jerry, what you're describing is a situation, and actually it could be what you're describing, Spike, which is where you get started and then you realize maybe the radar's out of alignment or you have a brake problem or an airbag problem. It sounds very simple, but I think this is what makes the most sense to me. Is you say exactly what happened. We started the repair. The customer came in for whatever they came in for. We started the repair and we identified an additional issue in the middle of the repair. We stopped our repair. We went to the customer. We informed them. Here's what we gave them. Here's the there's something very different going to someone and saying, here's a letter. This is describing the problem with your vehicle. I want you to read that letter and tell me if you're comfortable with you or your kids or whoever driving this vehicle in the next 24 hours. Now that is very different, and I think some folks would say, that's not feasible. That's a lot of work for each customer. But in my opinion, just being on the litigation side of it, if you see a letter like that says, we started your repair, we found this problem, here's the letter we gave to the customer still declined it, and there was nothing we could do, right? Because you cannot hold their vehicle hostage.
Right.
I think at that point, on my side of things, reading a letter like that, that's a harder sell than everybody signs this thing and we don't really. As long as you sign it, our lawyer said it's good, and so we're not really concerned about the safety, right? So, it goes back to that inform and document.
So really personalize it. Yeah.
As a lawyer at that point, you might say, I don't know that you have the best case.
Well, I would say that comes into the factor of all the other things that the case is about, right? Like, I don't know. That document would be helpful, in my opinion, would be helpful for you all from we really made this effort standpoint, if that makes sense.
Well, and what really interests me, and Jerry, I don't know if you got to see the podcast, but It was, I believe it might have been a dealer group or at least a Nissan authorized repair facility. And nobody even knew how to do the calibration there, which happens more and more that you deal with ADAS, whether it's, we use this tool which isn't approved, or yeah, we're good, we take it to the dealer. And we know dealers aren't always the best. Not saying they're the worst either. It's dependent on your dealer group. And the biggest thing is everybody needs to take this a whole lot more serious, because there's a lot of lives at stake with this, and sometimes you can't control it. So you're putting your life in somebody else's hand in more ways than one. Whether that customer hits somebody else because this system didn't work, whoever they hit didn't even know that this system wasn't going to work. So, they didn't even get to sign anything.
100%.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about the liability end of it, and we were talking about a customer making a decision on not to repair something. So what happens in a body shop when we are talking about an insurance situation and the insurance company takes the line of they want us to use a used part? They want us to repair it a certain way, or they don't authorize the OEM gold standard repair. They want to cut corners on that. Now what do we do? Because the shop now has the choice of either I do or I don't fix it. What do you suggest in a case like that where the insurance company is the one that's creating the problem? Short of trying to educate the customer and get the customer to talk to their own insurance company, I can't make the insurance company, make them pay for the proper repair. What do we do?
Yeah, so the reality is, like you said, that there's to an extent that's out of your hands, right? Because the customer has a contract with their insurance company, and the insurance company owes a duty to the customer. So you all can say your piece, and I've said before, and it's my position that that's appropriate and that you should, which is, in our experience, as the experts. You're the experts, right? The insurance company, an adjuster is not an expert in ADAS. Mm-hmm. Okay, and they may be an expert in how their business is run, but they're not an expert in ADAS. And so my thought on that is this, and let me preface with this: I'm not a contract lawyer, and I do more litigation than transaction. So I'm not providing legal advice that's a one size fits all of this is how to handle this situation forever. It's a complicated situation, and some of the stuff that's going on is wrong and it's dangerous. But I will say this, and I feel like I'm a broken record today, but write that out. Explain what's happening. This is, this is who I am. This is my company. This is what we do. This is why I'm educated to make the call here. And this is the call that I would make, and this is the safe call. The call that's being made by X, Y, and Z insurance company or even the customer is this. That is not safe for X, Y, and Z reasons. And I don't know. A lot of what goes on from there is nuanced. It depends on the body shop's relationship with the insurance company. It depends on the customer and how the customer wants to handle it. But on your end, you've said this is where I see a problem. And if it were me, being on the litigation side of things, again, this is not legal advice, but just being on the litigation side of things, I wouldn't touch that car. I wouldn't want to touch that car. Mm-hmm. Because then I say 2 years down the road, yeah, we knew that wasn't great. We knew that probably wasn't the way that the thing needed to be calibrated, but we did it. And we sent the customer out on the road. Now, it's easy for me to say. I'm sitting in an office. I'm not in a body shop, and I don't know what that looks like on a day-to-day other than what you all have expressed to me. But if it were me, I wouldn't want to touch that car. I would want to describe for the customer and the insurance company the problem with what they're asking to do.
Documentation. You hit on something there that I want to ask as well. How long is shop liable?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question.
It should be a simple answer, right?
Yeah, it should be, but this is the worst lawyer answer ever, but it totally depends. And I'm going to go back to my broken record, which is this. If when that vehicle leaves your shop, you've documented exactly what should have been done, and you've documented that you did that thing exactly. I don't know, and I cannot ever say what's going to happen when that vehicle, if there's a terrible crash 24 hours later, a month later, 6 months later. It may so happen that 6 months later there's a terrible crash and it left your body shop. That's just the universe. That's not anything you can do, right?
Again, why your documentation matters, so you could prove that you did it.
Well, you talk about, this is kind of a life lesson more than just a today lesson, but what can I control? What can I control? What I can control in my universe is that I identify what needs to be done, and I do what needs to be done. And when people come back to me down the road, whether it's a customer, whether it's a lawyer, whether it's an insurance company, and says X, Y, and Z car left your shop 6 months ago, and yesterday it was in a terrible crash, you can't prevent all of that. But what you can say right then is, yeah, we had that car here. This is what needed to be done to the car, and this is what we did. Now, the position that you don't want to be in, going back to your previous question, is, yeah, that car was in the shop. We really needed to do X, Y, and Z calibration. Well, we did A, B, and C calibration, and we have really good reasons for it, right? We have really good reasons why we were in a rock and a hard place and we did it. But I'd rather not be in that position.
A little scary at times, isn't it?
Yeah.
The more you know about it, it is.
I do want this to not be at the end of the day, and you can have certainly there can be fear around it, but at the end of the day, if you're doing what you need to do and you're documenting that, that's the truth. And in my world, the way that our firm practices law and the way that law should be practiced is the truth is, if the truth is on your side, then you're I don't want to say you're okay, but if the truth is on your side, then you're in a better position than if you're saying, yeah, we know we do shortcuts every day in our shop. And it's not hard as a lawyer to start figuring that out. It happens very fast, right? Where someone tells us they did a calibration and then we show up to the dealership and there's no calibration place.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is not, this is egregious. This is not like, if you're taking shortcuts. I mean, if lawyers are taking shortcuts, it's not hard to figure that out either, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I know I'm giving you the lawyer answer, it depends, but that's just the truth.
Just to switch gears slightly here, I'm curious, how long does an average case last or take? I know that's a wide open, long question answer probably, but
so we have had cases come in our office that settled within 60 days because liability is very clear.
mm-hmm.
Those typically tend to be just your run-of-the-mill car crash cases where someone hit someone and the person they hit got hurt. Oftentimes, the insurance company, if they're doing the right thing, will settle that case quickly because liability is not contested. The kind of work that we do, that's normally not what happens. The case comes into our office is not going to be a simple one, and that's just the way it is. But a lot of the times, when liability is contested, you're looking at, in our product liability cases, easily 2 years.
Yeah.
For one case. Now, we've had cases where we had to appeal up to higher courts for certain issues, and those have taken 7 or 8 because you're waiting for a very long time for the courts to make a decision, and at that point it's out of your hands, right? So cases, again, product liability cases take longer because there's just more discovery to do, and I always say the more defendants that have more lawyers, the longer that case is going to take.
I'm curious too, is on the mechanical side, a lot of these vehicles, I'll just make it simple, have the magic black box in the vehicle that can give you a lot of information. Is that hard for you when you're doing discovery on what may or may not have happened, to be able to have that information? Because the manufacturer's who's got to be able to access that and get that information. Is that a challenge? Is that a court order to get them to do that on a vehicle? Or how does that work?
That's a great question. It completely depends on the manufacturer. So there are manufacturers that, and we kind of know them now off the top of our heads, that if there's a crash, we can typically we'll send a accident reconstructionist expert out, and we just pay them. They go out with a tool, plug it into the OBD port, and can run a download. So we had an inspection down in Florida last week. It was actually a 5-car crash, but we sent an expert that's not from the OEMs. It was 5 different brands of vehicles, and he was able to do 5 downloads in a day because he just plugged in his system.
Okay.
Now, there are other vehicles, and this is less often, but this is the case with certain vehicles, where the manufacturer requires you to get the court involved. I don't know if you guys have followed at all some of the Tesla stuff, but Tesla's kind of notorious for that, right? So they have this kind of have taken this position that it's our data, and so if you want to get it, good luck. Now, where I take a little bit of issue with that is that you sold that vehicle to that person, and our position is that's their data, and often courts agree, which is you sold them the vehicle, you charge them for the vehicle, and then when something bad happens and they need information out of the vehicle, you take this approach that they can't have it. That's not right, but that is the way it happens some of the times. Fortunately, this day and age, most of the manufacturers, you can just download download information from the vehicle, and I will also say that as these cars become more complicated, we can actually get more information, which is very helpful for us because it helps us get to the kind of the truth of what happened. Back in the day, we used to have to do the old school reconstruction where you measure the crush on the vehicles and you use the crush to determine the delta V, the change in velocity.
Mm-hmm.
But today, the vehicles, most vehicles are like little computers, and they'll just tell you all of that.
Yeah, yeah. It's pretty interesting. It's quite fascinating, what they can do, what their ability is. I remember we had a case where a gentleman had an accident, and they were making a claim that the car created the situation. And it was interesting because in that case it was a Ford, and a rep came out and pulled the information down, and then the father came in and he was presented with the information of what their son had done in the driving the car, and it was pretty interesting seeing how quickly the son decided that maybe he should tell the truth. So I'm sorry?
The nice thing about that data is, oftentimes when we get police reports, like for example, when an individual is ejected from a vehicle, oftentimes the police report will list that they were not belted.
Mm-hmm.
And that's common sense. They list that because they say, well, how did they get ejected if they were belted? Well, if you have a product defect or if you have slack in the belt that shouldn't be there, you can absolutely be properly wearing your seatbelt to be ejected from a vehicle. The nice thing is then you just go to the download. So oftentimes people will say the police report said they weren't belted, and we never stop with the police report. We stop with the black box. As long as the black box is working functionally, is functioning properly, then that's the data that you start with.
Yeah. So backing up a little bit here, most of the cases that you get involved with then are litigation. You're representing the person that owns the vehicle. Am I correct with that?
It could be the person who owns the vehicle, or it could be another person on the road who was harmed by the vehicle. So someone else in a vehicle surrounding that vehicle, or a pedestrian, for example.
And so based off of that I'm going to assume that most of your cases then you're up against either an insurance company or a manufacturer of either the systems or the vehicle itself.
Yes, pretty much always. It's those three cast of characters.
Okay. And I'm going to ask a question you probably won't want to answer. Is there a particular vehicle that you drive based off of what you've seen in the industry?
There is a particular vehicle. No, I've purchased and repurchased vehicles because of the cases I've had in our office, actually. So to be honest with you, I'm never really happy with. It could always be better. I mean, it's kind of like too much information is a curse. I will say the sad reality is this: as the vehicles get more expensive, oftentimes, unfortunately, they tend to get safer. My spouse, I'm not going to go to the make and model, but my spouse drives a more expensive vehicle, and I feel more comfortable with that because the way that this is done often is that we kind of pay for safety in America.
Well, that's how ADAS came out,
Right.
was to make things safer. And is it working? It is. I mean, it's made a huge difference when done correctly.
Absolutely. Well, and you see it with the ADAS repairs is a great example of a lot of the times you do pay for safety because the better repairs are more expensive.
Yep.
The OEM repairs are more expensive. The tools to do ADAS repairs that are not, kind of fly-by-night situations are more expensive. And that's...
So you support the idea of a shop using OEM tools and equipment versus aftermarket? Is that important the way you see it?
So I will say my experience so far has been that tends to be better. Now I will also say that I'm not the expert on the differences. So if there is a clear difference and we've defined a difference and that as an engineer and an ADAS expert, you can see the difference. Frankly, if the aftermarket was proven to be more effective, use the aftermarket. It's not an OEM for the sake of it being an OEM, but what I've seen in our experience so far is that the literature in the OEM materials is more, it's better. Like it is better. But like I said, if some company came out and came up with an aftermarket ADAS calibration system that worked just as well, it's not OEM for the sake of being OEM, right? It's OEM because they seem to have developed, and they know their vehicles, and they know their vehicles best, right? I haven't seen aftermarket come out for the purpose of being better than OEM. We've seen aftermarket, the experience has been, it's just a cost savings issue, right?
Spike, any thoughts on that from your end of the arena?
I had so many going through my head that I'm like, okay, what should I say and what should I not say? You know, to me, we've tested some aftermarket stuff, and at least the ones we've tested, we just haven't seen it hold up quite the same. And our stance has always been, and we tell our customers, you know, the reason we do the route that we do is when you look in that workshop manual and it says it needs done, there are a couple companies that are getting approved for warranty work. The biggest catch is you still have to use the OEM computer. You know, they may approve the target, the system, but you still have to use the OEM computer, so you're not trying to fool the system, because some of these aftermarket systems can kind of force a calibration, if that makes sense. You know, it'll tell you it's good even though it's not. And again, I'm going to say, you know, to me, the biggest thing, Rebecca, I'm sure you're a great lawyer, but I'm going to tell my customers and my friends, try to use that OEM every single time to try to stay out of court, you know.
Well, that's what goes back to, you know, inform and then practice what you preach. So if you can say, in my experience, and you have a lot of it, OEM is best, then and you have your reasons, which you just described, and I'm sure you could do that for 2 more hours if you needed to, why OEM is best, then go with that, right? And document why it's best and document that you did that, right?
Yeah, and I mean, to me, we're at the tipping point, right? There's going to be a ton of lawsuits about ADAS. You're starting to see some now. You know, I know there was an OEM that just settled a couple out of court, a couple months ago. I know another OEM that just had a class action that they did some settling on. This isn't done. So again, try to protect yourself as much as humanly possible, and for the love of donuts, inform customers, right? Don't just say, yeah, you know, I'm not even going to do this one, because the customer needs to understand how important this is. They're not just affecting themselves. They could be affecting, you know, tons of other people on the road by a decision that they make. Yeah. You know, they need to do these.
I have a question about that from you guys' perspective, which is how often are body shops sending the vehicles out to ADAS calibration experts versus attempting to do the calibrations in-house?
Or not even doing them at all?
I would say the number of in-house is probably, if we're talking independents, or are we talking dealerships?
Dealerships.
Dealerships, if it's a brand they do, they're doing them in-house generally. If it's say they're a Buick dealership, they might have a Nissan come in. They can't do the Nissan. In my experience, a lot of dealerships are not buying the aftermarket equipment. Maybe less than 20% is my guess. And other than that, they're going to have a company like me or a friendly dealer that they have down the road possibly do those.
And then how about the independents?
Independents, I think that number is probably closer to maybe a 25 to 30% are doing them in-house. Because to me, they see it as a revenue source, maybe easy money, if that makes sense. But again, you know, we got to get those people educated. I don't care if you do it in-house, but let's do it the right way. Let's do some continuing education. Let's not have the detail kid be doing those, you know. Let's pick somebody that's specialized and he really knows his craft.
You know, I'm gonna put you on the spot here, Spike. The ones that are done in a dealership, just period, dealership period. How much confidence do you have that those are being done correctly?
Me personally?
Yeah.
Very little.
Yeah, that's my opinion.
And here's what I'll tell anybody listening. I don't care who does your calibration, me, Billy, Bob, or the dealership down the street. The first thing you should do is make sure the tire pressure does not match before you send it there. When it comes back, check the tire pressure, because step one is make sure the tires are inflated correctly. And I think you're going to see 85 to 90% of the time when it comes back, that tire pressure is not correct, which they missed step one. Mm-hmm. I don't trust them on step 10 if they didn't get step one.
Right. That to me is what's scary. That's just scary.
And a lot of times we hear that they're just checking for codes. Oh, there's no code, we're good. Go ahead and send it down the road. Well, a code isn't thrown unless it's really, really bad. I don't want to drive really, really bad. I don't want to drive kind of bad. I want to drive, I paid X amount of dollars for this. I want to own the road and be confident, you know, in what I'm doing. And I got grandkids now, and I love my grandkids more than I love my kids. You know, being a grandparent's pretty awesome. I just want to make sure that they're safe, you know.
I think I had interrupted you there, Rebecca, when I asked Spike that question.
No, I had the same question. I obviously, as a person that drives vehicles, always have the question of, do I take it to the dealership for my vehicle, and can I use it in an independent shop? And it obviously depends on the repair that I'm doing. But I think a lot of people, just lay people, have the feeling that when I go to the dealership, for X, Y, and Z make, then they sell me all kinds of crap that I don't need. And so there's this balance between not feeling like you're getting hosed by the dealership, but then also not wanting to down the road go, I got my car repaired for cheap and now I'm paying the price.
Mm-hmm.
And I am seeing, like, we're having an education class with one of our OEMs about ADAS September 10th, I believe. So we're starting to see them do some training to the rest of us, right? Not just their technicians, but anybody that buys parts from them or whatever. And those are great classes. So if they're in your area, I would suggest, if you own a body shop, I don't even care if you do calibrations. Go just for the education. Again, part of that continuing education.
And I did want to make a note to make a point on that on our call today, which is a big piece of documenting is not just the isolated repair, but documenting your training process for the folks in your dealership. One of the first things we ask for whenever there's a potential negligent maintenance case is who worked on the vehicle, and we want their employee file. And you would be amazed, and it's not just automobiles, it's forklifts, it's heavy industrial equipment, where the employee file is about 3 documents. It's an application, drug test, and it's a sign the policies and procedures and you're hired. Now you may say, but this guy had 25 years of experience. He told me that he worked at blah, blah, blah shop. And well, the reality is sometimes you go back and look at where he worked and he was fired, or he had some, where he had some experience where he actually didn't learn to do ADAS calibrations at all. I mean, he worked at a body shop, but the body shop didn't do any ADAS. So I think it sounds obvious, but just based on the litigation that we do, apparently it's not to a lot of is train these people and document the training. And if you have I'm looking at that right now for a case we have involving some heavy industrial equipment, which is, look at all the training that is out there. There's tons. And this is not a nascent technology. This is like an old school piece of industrial equipment that it's not hard to get training on. So this September 11th event that you're describing, that's a great opportunity to show not only do we care about this specific repair, but we care about the people who did it, and we made sure to set them up for success.
It's interesting that you make that statement, Rebecca, on the documentation for training, and because I just know in my past experience, you're right. The HR department has, the 3 documents as you suggested, but when it came to the training, they never got any of that. That was retained in my laptop and in my records. When I walk out the door with my laptop, there went all the documentation. So that's a good point. That needs to be handled at the shops. Not just the manager, but the HR department needs to have all that stuff too. So it's a good point. It's a good point. You think you're doing it right, and you have it, but you really don't all have it.
Well, particularly if the laptop that it's on, that person leaves, or their laptop gets destroyed, or their data gets wiped, or there's some security breach. I mean, it's very different to say, we definitely trained him, we just don't have any records of training him. I mean,
now the one thing that is helpful at a dealership versus a independent body shop. Now, the dealerships typically, at least in the mechanical side, the manufacturers typically have training classes, and then it's documented through the manufacturer. But a lot of times in the body shop, you're looking at independent trainings, and or you can have iCar, which you're going to have it through iCar there. You're going to have records. But yeah, we need to do a better job with that for sure. We need to put you out of work is what needs to happen here.
And we've been waiting on that for a long time. It hasn't happened yet.
I don't think that's going to happen. I really don't.
Yeah, but in all seriousness, I will say this: it's an interesting dichotomy, because we make a living, when these terrible things happen, and that's just a reality. But I will say, if you met like 3 of the families that we represent, there is no question that it would be a better day in the world if we did not have this work to do. I mean, and the reality is, for us, it's it's my job and this is your job, and we're talking about our jobs today, and we're talking about how we make a living. But the people who are the reason why I'm here are, it sounds obvious, but it's someone's kid. Like it's real life. It's like we talk about being a grandparent. I mean, we have a client who lost their grandson, and I mean, it's real consequences, and I not to bring the mood down, but I can't say that enough, because it's not just a transaction. It's like real people riding in these cars.
Well, and the sad thing is some of these companies will never change until they're forced to, right? And they're forced to because their pocketbook got hit.
Yeah.
So now, hey, let's change how we do this and do it more right, or change the design or whatever. I did have somebody want me to ask you one question, Rebecca. So in our world, we deal a lot with sublets. So you have a sublet glass company, sublet ADAS company, sublet for mechanical. Who's on the hook if that sublet does not do it right? And as a part B, he wanted me to specifically ask about windshields. So say that an aftermarket windshield's coming in or going on that vehicle instead of the OEM. Are you liable, or is that glass company liable?
In this situation, what you're describing is a body shop sublets the glass out to the
glass company,
which is pretty common.
Correct.
Right. So when we throw around the word liable, I think the best way to think about that word is take it all the way to, in America, we have a jury system. And so I can say all day who's liable. And at the end of the day, my job is to prove that up, but I don't make that decision.
Yeah.
Really, a jury makes that decision. And so I think a good way to frame liability is if you just took 12 people, you went out in the world and you just found 12 people and you brought them in a room and you sat them down and you explained the situation to them. What kind of things would you want to be able to show them about what you did, right? Because it's I think with lawyers it's easy to throw around you're liable for this or you're not liable for that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I don't make that call. At the end of the day, I prove up what I think I can prove and I do my best to represent my client in front of a jury. But the verdicts are 12, and that's what's beautiful about our system is it's just 12 normal people saying what makes sense to us.
Yeah.
Right. And we talk about, these out of court settlements. Those settlements happen because the OEM or the body shop or whoever the defendant is doesn't necessarily want to see 12 people look at this. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the windshield example, if you have done everything you can in your expertise, and then you say windshields aren't our expertise, within the world that is our responsibility, we did everything and we documented everything. And then we passed it off because not only do we know what's in our expertise, we know what's not, which is just as important. And we passed that off. And when we passed that off, here's what we asked of the windshield company. This was our contract with them. This is our relationship with them. This is why we trust them. And that goes back to vetting, which is if you go if you're pulling some random company off the street that's going to give you the cheapest price, and you tell 12 jurors, well, the way we vetted this company was they were the cheapest. What are 12 normal people going to think about? They're not going to like that.
Right. I kind of threw it back to this guy. I said, to me, a lot of that boils down, what did the customer know was going to happen? Did they assume they were getting OEM? Did we inform them, hey, your insurance company put down aftermarket. What do you want us to do? Because again, it's still their car in my mind.
Absolutely.
But again, back from what we learned a little earlier in this podcast, and that is documentation. So if you've covered yourself and you've listed it out and make it personalized for each case, at least you have something that you can defend yourself with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You talk about things hitting home. It has nothing to do with it, but I lost my mom in a car accident. And it was an interesting process going through what I had to go through. It was a 2-year deal. Yeah, it's not fun. I learned an awful lot on what takes place, and I learned an awful lot about what I thought prior and then what I learned through the process. I learned that a law doesn't mean anything until you make somebody abide by the law. Mm-hmm. Which is very frustrating. But, in that process, in my past, I did child seat installs, certified for child seats. And what was disappointing to me is how many people, when you're trying to teach them to put the child seat in, really didn't care about the safety end of it. They only cared about how convenient and how inconvenient it was for them and what they wanted. They really weren't interested in learning to do it correctly, or I shouldn't say a lot of them didn't. And it was sad. I remember one grandmother, she didn't care about learning. She just wanted me to put the seat in, and she wanted to put it in where she wanted. It had nothing to do with what was right or wrong. And I finally looked at her, and as you say, sometimes you refuse. I told her, I says, I'm not going to put your seat in. You don't care about the safety of your grandchild. I don't want any part of this. And she left. It's like, wow. It's scary what you run into out there. the result is other people pay the price. That's the sad part.
100%. I'm sorry to hear that you had to go through that with your mother, just like you're describing. I mean, it's a extremely painful process.
Yep, yep. But that's real. I guess, you see it every day. And I'm curious, how many cases that you are involved with actually end up in a court case, and what's settled outside of court?
That's a good question. I would say it's maybe 80%, 70 to 80 settle out, and then 20 to 30 go.
I'm actually surprised it's that high, but maybe it's just the type of cases that you have. I don't know.
Well, and I think when they settle out, they're also not disclosing any of that, right? They're not allowed to usually say what they're getting. Am I accurate there?
Yeah, we just actually reviewed a settlement release this morning where the OEM, we are not going to sign it. I mean, it's just like a complete. That's how that goes without getting down that rabbit hole. And I also just want to make this point before we wrap, which is the fact that there's been so much interest in doing this the right way I just want to commend both of you, and I truly mean that, which is that you guys are the folks who care. And the fact that there is this much interest in doing this the right way is so encouraging, because the more people that have this mindset, the more lives are going to be saved, honestly. And I think that it's easy to get into the fear of, I don't want to get sued, and then all these people are doing all this bad stuff, and all these people are making cars dangerous. And it's easy, especially in this job, I think, to kind of catastrophize about it's like watching the news, right? It's just a nightmare every time. But it is very encouraging to see folks who, of course they're making a living, but they're also wanting to make a living in a way that keeps people safe.
Yeah. I appreciate that.
Me also.
Well, I don't know that I have any. Well, actually, I have a whole lot of other questions, but we're out of time. I think I could ask questions all day long here, but I really, really appreciate the time that both of you have taken, and very informative. And I hope a lot of people get a chance to see and learn from this, as we talked about, and continue to go on from here. So it's interesting just to see where this business has come, and who knows where we're going to be going. But it's not a simple thing. I do have one question that I wanted to ask earlier, and I have to ask this, Rebecka. If your personal vehicle got into an accident, tell me what you would do. And I don't mean a fender bender. I mean, let's just, and I'll classify this. So let's just say that it's a $7,000-8,000 repair, which nowadays isn't necessarily real bad. Would you have that vehicle repaired and keep driving it, or would you get rid of it and get a different one, knowing what you know?
That is a good question.
I would want to see if it happened to me today, I would take it to the dealership and I would have it repaired with all OEM parts, and I would feel comfortable driving that car. Before, in my previous life, maybe in my 20s, I would take it to whoever would get it back on the road.
Yeah.
And I was the person who they would be saying, you need to do X, Y, and Z. And I was like, I can't afford that, so I'm not going to do that. But yeah, I would take it to the OEM, and then I would be maybe their worst nightmare in terms of looking at my repair work. But I would, and the other thing, and I do this with contractors that come to my house, is it never hurts to take it to a couple different folks and see if they're telling you the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we're starting to see a lot of post-repair inspections in our industry, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Let's point out some bad actors and make them change their views, maybe.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you to both of you, and this has been fun, educational, and I really appreciate both of your times. And
Thank you, guys.
we'll go from there. So, all right. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecka.
Thanks, guys.